I was standing at the edge of my pasture when the bulldozer rolled straight through the cedar post. My father and I set 15 years ago. It didn't hesitate. The blade dropped, the earth folded, and the post snapped like a matchstick, before disappearing under a wave of red clay. I didn't wave my arms. I didn't shout. I walked down the slope, boots sinking into fresh churn, and waited for the operator to cut the engine. The site supervisor met me halfway, clipboard tucked under his arm. Hard hat too clean for a man doing real work. "You're crossing a surveyed boundary," I told him. He gave me a polite smile. "We're building per HOA approved plans. Everything's cleared with the county." I nodded. I already knew what was filed with the county. I also knew what wasn't. That strip of land had been surveyed, recorded, and taxed in my name for over a decade. I had the pins, the plats, and the receipts to prove it. I took pictures of the crushed marker, the grading stakes, the men pouring forms where my line used to be. Then I left without another word. What they didn't realize was that everything they were building depended on something upstream. They never checked. That property wasn't just acreage on a tax map. My father bought it when I was 12, paying it off in slow, disciplined increments, while other men traded trucks every 3 years. He used to say, "Land doesn't argue back, and it doesn't lie. It only remembers." We built the small earthen dam together one summer. Nothing dramatic, just enough to hold back runoff from the northern ridge and feed a shallow basin for irrigation and wildlife. Over time, I reinforced the spillway with stone and concrete, added a steel gates assembly, and filed every modification properly. Permits, inspections, maintenance logs. I kept copies in a binder in my office and digital scans backed up twice. When GPS mapping became standard, I paid for updated surveys. I walked the lines myself, metal detector in hand, finding the pins and driving cedar posts beside them. Every boundary was plotted against GIS overlays and recorded with the county. If there was ever a question, the answer was already on file. My father taught me that you don't defend land with raised voices. You defend it with paper. The parcel also carried recorded water management rights control over retention and discharge, tied specifically to that dam structure. When I checked the county website that night, I realized they hadn't just crossed a line. They'd built across it. Within a month, the pasture looked like a different county. Concrete trucks lined the gravel road before sunrise. Forms went up in neat rectangles where deer used to bed down. By the time the first slab-cured marketing banners were already staked along the highway, Cedar Ridge Estates from the $400, clean fonts, artist renderings, promises. I hired an independent surveyor who had no connection to the developer or the county. We walked the perimeter together, metal detector chirping, as he located the original pins. He ran fresh measurements, cross-referenced the recorded plat, and overlaid everything against the subdivision's filed site plan. The number wasn't small. 8.4 acres of my land had been absorbed into their footprint roads, drainage swales, backyards, and part of the retention pond grading. I took the survey straight to a real estate attorney who specialized in boundary disputes. He studied it quietly, then leaned back. "If you confront them now," he said, "they'll file for an emergency injunction. They'll argue good faith reliance on outdated plats. It'll be messy, and you'll look like the one stopping families from buying homes." He tapped the paper. "But if they finish construction and close on these houses, liability multiplies, title exposure, insurance involvement, regulatory scrutiny. Their risk grows every day those slabs cure." I understood what he was saying. Timing mattered more than outrage. So I drove home, parked by the dam, and listened to the spillway trickle over stone. I made a decision most men wouldn't. I let them keep building. While framing crews moved from slab to slab, I spent my evenings in a quieter kind of construction, building a paper trail. I pulled archived plats from the county database, some scanned so poorly the edges blurred into gray. The subdivision's approved site plan referenced a boundary map recorded nearly 30 years ago, before my father commissioned the resurvey that corrected the eastern line. That updated survey had been filed properly 12 years back, stamped and indexed. It just hadn't been used. Somewhere between the Planning Commission and the HOA's Architectural Committee, someone relied on the older plat. Whether it was convenience or assumption didn't matter. The legal boundary was the one on record. That was the first mistake. The second was more interesting. The retention pond they advertised on brochures, the one with the walking path, and the planned fountain wasn't a standalone feature. It depended on runoff from the northern ridge that first collected behind my dam before flowing through a controlled spillway and drainage channel that crossed into what they now called common area. I pulled my deed and read the language again. Explicit water flow control rights. Sole maintenance authority over the dam structure and discharge rate. No easement granting the county operational control. No transfer of hydraulic authority. Stormwater compliance for the entire subdivision was engineered based on regulated outflow from that system. Without controlled discharge upstream, their basin calculations didn't hold. I attended one open house out of curiosity. The sales agent described the pond as community managed. I didn't correct her. They thought it was a decorative pond. It wasn't. By late summer, driveways were filling with moving trucks. I watched couches carried through front doors that technically sat 8 feet inside my recorded boundary. Kids rode bikes along a road poured over what used to be my grazing line. The pond had water in it, now reflecting half-finished roofs and fresh sod. Then the certified letter arrived. The HOA board claimed I was interfering with community infrastructure by questioning drainage access and approaching contractors. They demanded I cease contact with vendors and refrain from obstructing subdivision improvements. I read it twice, set it down, and made coffee. My response wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Through my attorney, I sent formal notice of trespass and encroachment to the developer, the HOA, and their registered agent. Attached were the updated survey deed excerpts detailing water control rights and a statement of intent to enforce those rights if unaddressed. We filed the notice with the county recorder. That single act that changed the temperature of everything. It created a legal timestamp. From that day forward, any continued sales occurred with constructive notice of a boundary dispute. Insurance carriers were copied. 2 title companies acknowledged receipt. This was no longer a disagreement between neighbors. It was a documented liability. The HOA president called once. I let it go to voicemail. Once that letter was filed with the county, there was no going back to a quiet conversation. The Weather Service started using phrases like slow-moving system and historic totals. Around here, that usually means the low spots remember who owns them. Before the first cloud rolled in, I called a civil engineer I'd worked with years earlier when reinforcing the spillway. We walked the dam together, boots damp with morning dew, checking the gate assembly, the riprap, the overflow channel. Everything met spec. My inspection logs were current. The structure was sound. I performed scheduled maintenance the same way I always had cleared debris from the intake grate. Tested the gate wheel, adjusted the outflow to retain a slightly higher pool level upstream. Nothing extreme, nothing outside my recorded rights. The deed gave me sole authority to regulate discharge to protect my acreage from erosion. When the rain came, it came steady. Water collected behind the dam rising within expected tolerance. Downstream, the subdivision's retention pond began filling faster than their grading plan anticipated. Their calculations had assumed a different upstream release pattern, one that no longer applied. I installed a simple measuring stake at my property line and photographed levels morning and evening, dates visible, timestamps intact. Then I sent a measured email to the HOA board and developer advising them that continued reliance on my controlled discharge without a negotiated drainage easement created compliance exposure. I invited discussion. They ignored the email. The third night of rain was the one that shifted everything. By morning, the retention pond had swallowed the decorative rocks lining its edge. Water pressed into fresh sod behind 2 unfinished homes, turning neat rectangles of grass into shallow mirrors. It wasn't catastrophic, no living rooms flooded, no cars floating, but it was visible. And visibility changes tone. Homeowners gathered along the walking path in rain jackets, pointing at the waterline creeping toward their fences. The contractors' trucks circled like they could outdrive physics. The county stormwater inspector arrived just before noon. Clipboard, boots, neutral expression. He asked the developer for documentation of hydraulic authority over upstream flow control. There was a pause I could feel from across the water. I walked over when he asked if anyone held recorded discharge rights. "I do," I said. We stood under the clubhouse awning while rain ticked against metal. I opened my binder deed, excerpts, survey overlays, maintenance logs, photographs with timestamps. I explained calmly that I had exercised standard retention within permitted limits. Across the lot, the HOA president was shouting into his phone at the grading contractor. I wasn't shouting. The inspector read the deed language twice, while I did. That was the first time they realized the pond didn't belong to them. They scheduled the meeting for Thursday night. Every folding chair in the clubhouse was filled men standing along the walls, women holding printed photos of the pond against their fences. The air smelled like wet carpet and fresh paint. The HOA president opened with the word sabotage. He didn't look at me when he said it. I waited until he finished, then stood. I didn't raise my voice. I explained that I had exercised recorded water retention rights within the limits of my deed and in full compliance with county code. I passed copies of the filed notice, the updated boundary survey, and a letter from the civil engineer confirming the dam's operational integrity. Murmurs moved through the room as pages turned. Then I added what most of them didn't know. 57 homes along with portions of the roadway and common area were built across a boundary, never lawfully transferred. The updated survey had been on record for 12 years, simply hadn't been used. The developer's attorney seated near the front cleared his throat. He spoke carefully. Title, exposure, potential defects. Insurance notification, environmental compliance tied to upstream control. Civil damages were possible. So were regulatory penalties. No one shouted after that. The president's shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. The contractor stared at the table. Homeowners looked from them to me, recalculating. Wasn't humiliation in the theatrical sense. It was quieter than that. It was understanding. After a long silence, the board president finally asked the only question left. They asked what it would take to fix it. I didn't answer immediately. I let the quiet hold for a moment so it was clear this wasn't improvisation. "I'm not interested in tearing down anyone's home," I said. "Families didn't cause this." Then I laid out the terms. First, the developer would purchase the full 8.4 acres at current developed market value, not pasture pricing. An independent appraiser jointly selected. Funds held in escrow until transfer recorded. Second, the stormwater system would be redesigned, so the subdivision no longer depended on unilateral upstream control. That meant rerouting discharge or constructing independent retention capacity, engineered and approved by the county. Third, all legal and survey costs incurred on my side would be covered. Finally, a formal correction would be recorded, updated plats, amended disclosures, and written acknowledgement of the boundary error. No speeches, no threats, just conditions. The developer's attorney asked for a recess. Insurance representatives joined by phone the next morning. Once carriers understood the title exposure and regulatory risk, the tone shifted from defensive to practical. The same board that had accused me of sabotage now asked for documentation checklists and timelines. Arrogance fades quickly when liability becomes measurable. The settlement was signed on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, escrow was funded, and the revised plats were in motion. Engineers began staking out a redesigned drainage channel that would bypass my discharge point entirely. It took them 3 months to complete the work. The afternoon after everything recorded, I walked up to the dam alone. The rain had stopped weeks earlier. The basin behind the gate was calm, dragonflies skimming the surface. I put a wrench on the wheel and eased the gate open to its normal operating position. Water moved through the spillway in a steady, familiar sheet. Nothing dramatic about it. I hadn't flooded anyone. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply enforced what was already mine. If I'd confronted them the day that bulldozer crushed my boundary marker, if I'd yelled, threatened, demanded, I would have been painted as the obstacle. They would have buried me in motions and emergency filings. Instead, I let them build their assumption to scale. Then I corrected it with paper. Some men think strength is volume. My father taught me it's patience. Land doesn't shout when it's crossed, it waits. And if you're patient enough, it speaks for itself.